Different level of conversation and approach than what you guys normally do. So my job, I run a group at IDC. I've been there for about 6.5 years. My group covers worldwide coverage on all the basic enterprise apps categories. So things like ERP and CRM, PLM, etc. And all the company business models. So cloud, maintenance, pricing, all those kind of vendor topics, and all the partner channel alliance programs. So very much focused on software, and my career really was with software vendors. So I worked for 7 software vendors before I came here. I ran global consulting at Autodesk. I'm an ex-PeopleSoft guy from the mid to late 90s. Did a few startups. And at IDC, I'm responsible for emerging trend research in the enterprise and looking at, kind of major shifts in technology in the 3 to 5 year time frame, sometimes out to 10 years. So some of the stuff that we'll talk about is stuff that's happening now. Some of it are things that I think are evolving and are going to be important over the next few years. So some of those things are, challenges to the way companies operate today, and a lot of them tie back into technology in some way. So when Ami asked me to do this, I wanted to try out this. We just really started to refocus our CRM work around customer experience. And if you follow the marketing from a lot of the large companies, you've probably heard this kicked around a lot in the last 6 or 8 months. But I think there is something to this. And more as we look at CRM and social business, which is research that I started almost 5 years now, actually. And we call that one of the 4 pillars of technology. We have these 4 sort of major transformational forces that are driving things. And so as we started to look at that, we realized that in several areas across the business, there are really some things that are changing and have to be approached in a really different way. So, just to talk history, though, recent history. If you think about where we've been over the last 5, 6, 7 years, there's been a ton of economic pressure, both from the recession and followed the recession and slow growth and volatility, and we talk about the workforce and how it changes, and how we really start to see baby boomers moving out and different tech savvy kind of population moving in, and frankly just a change in not just demographics from an age perspective, but a change in people and the way they want to interact, and it's not even age limited. In fact, if you look at the fastest growing segment on Facebook, it's the over 55 segment. It has been for a while. In Twitter, it's the 35 to 45 category. So it's not just my 2 teenage daughters, although frankly they do certainly add a lot to the Instagram traffic. But it's a change that's really started to impact people and the way they interact. And so I started to look at this, and I did a couple internet startups during the bubble, and unfortunately right after, and and so we really started to think about, what does connectivity do, and what does this really mean, and what's the fundamental shift that starts to change the way we think about business. And I know this group, certainly from a Salesforce perspective, you're probably all really comfortable talking about the cloud and how technology can be delivered and how it's really transformational when it's delivered from the cloud. But if you think about that in a really fundamental way, it's really just because of the internet that we have this new capability, a new technology, and a new way to deliver technology that is simple but really transformational if you think about the way that it starts to impact businesses and the way they use technology. So, connectivity, it opens up all these opportunities. I mean, what businesses in 1980, who would have thought that you could build hundreds of billions of dollars of value in a business that doesn't sell anything directly? It actually makes nothing. Well, okay, small segment of apps and Android operating systems, but beyond that, all their revenue is indirect. They create value by creating value for another value chain. And so the internet opened up that opportunity. Think about Amazon. I was just reading an article this morning about how Amazon is once again trying to disrupt the publishing business by going direct to the authors, and there was a kind of a poster child, really big author, done well and had signed with them for multi-millions of dollars, and now all the brick and mortar shops have just basically cut them out. They won't do business with anything that comes from Amazon because Amazon's been so disruptive to their business. And that's really just because they have that connectivity and we're able to distribute things in a really different way. Think about the social implications. And, you know, somebody asked us how we met before. And I think about this a lot because, you know, I travel a lot. I do a lot of sessions and conferences and things. And I have friends that are scattered all over the world. And in the past, when I made new friends, they were generally people that I met, that I had some kind of connection to. They were, you know, proximity and really the interaction over time built trust. And once you bring the social web into this, I have friends that I've never physically met that I tell more than I tell people that I grew up with and have known for, you know, 40 years. And that's exactly how we connected first. I still lived in San Francisco then, and we started having a conversation around something on my blog, I think, on Twitter. And then over time, we actually did meet face to face and have some pretty good conversations around what was happening around some of those changes. But relationships have been completely redefined. The internet takes proximity out of the conversation completely. So now I have friends that are connected and share and interact much more frequently than people that live next door to you because of that connectivity. So if you look at some history, I told you this was going to be like, you know, no technology here. We're going to talk high level first. Think about revolution first. So if you think about what happened a little over 200 years ago, it's a really interesting parallel. So what changed that caused the Industrial Revolution to really take hold? So we were an agrarian country, an agrarian economy with cottage industry, and in a really, really short period of time, we shifted from agrarian society, and that drove social interaction as well as the economy, to these industrial centers that really shifted away from that agrarian lifestyle. Well, what changed? Well, first of all, technology on the farm started to change so that you didn't need as much labor to do the same amount of work. And at the same time, technology changed in the cottage industry world to create the opportunity to do a lot more because of the automation from the factory side. So they could actually move from cottage to this environment that allowed you to build a labor force with a certain amount of automation to create and leverage that and create a lot more. So because of that shift, people on the farms looked for work. They moved to the cities. They started to congregate around these industrial centers. So that changed the society fairly dramatically. You built institutions that we still deal with today that are built around a paradigm that really came from the management philosophy and business philosophy of those industrial companies. I mean, think about the way schools organize today. And like I said, I have 2 teenage daughters, and I think about this quite a lot with them, and as they tell me about the way they're taught, and I realize that the way they're taught today is mimicking a way of work that they will never be a part of, more than likely. In other words, we have these institutions that perpetuate a model that we've now started to see shift because it takes a period of time for the rest of that society and that culture to build back up around the new paradigm. So it really was about economic change, social change, and technology change. And the only way this can happen is when all of those things interact together. One of those forces would have never caused all of this. It had to be all three. So then, what happened? We grew these traditional businesses that we've all worked in, and may still work in, that were built around hierarchical structures, that were built around this kind of top-down command and control. They were built around this concept, and I grew up with this: knowledge is power. The idea that if I could control the information flow inside of my business, then I could be that much more valuable and powerful, because that information gave me that power, gave me that leverage that I wouldn't have had otherwise. And you know, this whole model is really built around the idea of automation, process, and stability. It's built around the idea that things don't change. In fact, if you think back to some of your first jobs, I bet you've seen these and you remember this: the strategy binder. That big strategy thing that they did, that they put on a big shelf somewhere in the strategy guy's office, and they left it there for 5 years, and then they dusted it back off, and they checked the strategy and went, yep, okay, we're still doing fine what we meant to do, and we're going to go on. It was built around the idea that change was bad. And in fact, the foundation of a lot of the businesses today still look just like that. And I built a whole software career in the 90s around implementing technology that created that created process, automation, and stability. You built the rigid process, and that's how the operation would continue, and that's what churned things out. That's the way, and it didn't matter if it was information or if it was a manufacturing organization. That was the concept. So then, we have connectivity. So what happens? So once again, we start to see some things happen. Economically, we see creative business models that drive innovation, that change dramatically the way businesses can create value. You have whole new distribution schemes. You have cottage industries that can now be global businesses because they have a global supply chain and the ability to reach people all over the world. You have businesses that can change and operate in really dramatic ways. There's a company in Hayward, California. These 3 ex-Nike executives got together, and they thought we could build shoes and make them better than what Nike can do, and so let's build this business. And they got together, a small team. They had the 3 original executives, and they hired 6 people, so some office staff, a few business development people, and some marketing. And they did the design themselves, they outsourced the engineering, they outsourced the manufacturing, and they sold through a channel. So, in fact, 9 people built a business that in the first year did over $35 million. 9 people. Keen Shoe Company. You've probably seen these little funny looking shoes with the little holes in them, and they're kind of Keen. They're definitely over $100 million now. I haven't checked on them lately, and they still operate with almost no staff because they can leverage all this technology and the connectivity. So they have the ability to create value very rapidly in a way that nobody expected. So what does that mean to you from a competitive standpoint? It means that in the past, you had a new competitor, you knew about it for 1.5 years, 2 years maybe more. Now, you could wake up tomorrow and somebody in a place you can't spell has just completely destroyed your business model and is selling your service or product for half of what you did. And they can distribute it easily, and they have global distribution, and they have marketing, and they have all these things because of the internet. So competition changes dramatically. And then, that opens up all these new technologies: cloud, mobile, data, and how we consume data. I don't like to use the word big data. It just scares me. That is anyway. So all these new technologies, and they really start to create this new impact around what that looks like. And then lastly, I mentioned this, the social web, the social change, the ability to build relationships online, trust relationships online in a way that completely disrupts what we would have thought of as a friendship or a relationship in the past. Dramatically changes the way that we can interact with people. And also has opened up an avenue to, 200 of my oldest, closest high school friends that I probably never wanted to see again, but that's another issue, right? Well, they probably never want to see me either. So in other words, new behaviors and expectations. You heard this term, consumerization of IT. That was created by one of my competitors. I don't like it at all, but it actually is pretty accurate. But it's simpler than consumerization of IT. Sounds like a big thing, right? is really two simple things. One, innovation shifted. So we used to take enterprise technology and push it out to consumers. And somewhere along the way, that turned around, and so we started to take the consumer stuff, which was way better than the enterprise stuff, and start using it. I was doing a conference call on the way over here, efficiently driving, but safely with a headset. And I got into a really long conversation with my boss around some new system that we rolled out that won't run on a mobile device. And our IT organization didn't understand why I was upset and refused to use it. It works fine on the VPN. My iPad won't work on the VPN. My iPhone doesn't work on the VPN. People expectations of the way they want to work have shifted dramatically. I don't sit in an office with a desktop connected to a network. And none of the people who work for me do that. And that's a very different way of starting to think about the way you need to build technology and deploy technology. Trust is another one of those things that, think about if you were going to buy, I'm a photographer and I'm really into cameras, and so let's say I was going to buy a new camera. In 1995, what would I have done? I would have gone on the internet, probably. I would have bought some magazines and read them, but I would have read sources that came from where? From the company I was going to buy from. Now, I bought a new camera a few months ago. Where did I go? Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn. I talked to some friends on a couple photography groups that I'm a member of, 500 Pics, I asked some questions. I didn't once look at a single company branded resource, not once, in making my buy decision. You're losing control of the message. And influence, what does influence mean? This is another one of my favorite stories, and mostly because I lived in San Francisco for a long time and I had to fly United a lot, and so I know how bad they were, or are. Actually, I should not make that past tense. No United employees are there. I actually did get caught there like 2 weeks ago. So, you think this guy Dave Carroll, and you guys have all heard this story, I'm sure, but this Canadian folk musician hops on United, checks his guitar, Taylor guitar, and unfortunately when he lands, his guitar is now in a bunch of pieces versus the original shape. So he spends a year dealing with United's customer service, getting shuffled from one person to another. IVR systems, and this, no, you got to go to this supervisor, you have to file this form, you got to do this thing. 12 months after, he just gets disgusted and he gets his band together, writes a song, makes a YouTube video, posts it, 5 million hits in the first day. 2 days later, United called him, and guess what? By the end of the week, he got his new guitar. And a week later, he flew them and they lost his bags, but they don't really learn. But influence has shifted dramatically, and relevance has shifted. So, any individual can have a positive or a negative platform that can reach millions of people that fast. And then, again, the power of connectivity, knowledge sharing becomes the power base. In a company today, that person that thinks they can control the information flow, what happens? It just flows around them. They can't, because the sources are not controllable anymore. It just continues to flow in this multi-channel kind of strange connected web that we have now, and the power really comes from being transparent and open and starting to share, and really starting to build the culture around that. So I did a case study for IBM a few months ago. They did this project. They started probably 6 years ago now. They called it Blue IQ. Their problem was they had hundreds of thousands of salespeople in the field and had no idea who to ask when they had a question, because the organization was so big and complex that if you needed an expert in some specific thing, where did you go to find it? Did you go to the Lotus Notes email directory? Couldn't find a thing. So they completely re-architected the way they think about information flow in the company. They changed incentives, they built a team of champions, they actually built a product that they now sell, and it's the #1 enterprise social network by revenue, and has been for 2 years in a row. They built all of this, but why? Because they couldn't figure out a way to increase sales efficiency and sales effectiveness unless they could figure out